This week's report from New Jay. Okay, well, I'm going to do this one on defense. I was watching the other morning a morning show news, kind of entertainment news, and they were reporting on how many satellites are surrounding the Earth. I looked it up because I couldn't remember the number that they had done on the report. Well, the only thing I could find was from 2022, 4 years ago. There was about 4,000 satellites. Now, what I remember them saying on this show is there were 30,000 now. And that there's this whole battle going on around the Earth. And spy satellites is a big part of it between all the major nations. You know, I look at the whole scene and how insane it is getting. The nature isn't changed. I mean, the whole warring nature, the defense, offense. The thing about it is that, you look at how much self-protection, how much energy, for a nation, for example, and especially when you become one of the most powerful nations, now you have to maintain that. And so how much of your energy is put into defending your borders and your control? And then, even in the spirit of defense, taking over other lands outside of your own territory, because you feel like if you don't have a buffer, it just goes on and on. Now, this has been ruling the earth for thousands of years, and it's nothing new. You got these huge nations now with all this technology, but it started out with tribes. Same thing. If you read the history of Native Americans, they were doing the same thing. They were battling over their hunting grounds, and they had territories. I listen to the barking dogs. What are they saying? It's all territorial. It's all defense. That's what it is. So the energy of that, oh my goodness, when you hear it in a barking dog and you're sensitive to it, the Lord has me in an environment where I get to hear a lot of that. So it makes me contemplate it. And then, of course, it always takes me inside. The defense among one another, and especially when you're close. Yeah, the surrender of everything to our Father. Now, in the world, see, without that, there is no answer in the world. And although the nature, I don't believe, has changed for thousands of years since the fall. A lot of people think it's getting way worse. Well, studying history, it's pretty bad all along. There's times when it ebb and flows in small increments in different areas and in the world. And now that the world is much smaller in the sense that there's airplanes and communication, fast speed of everything. Yeah, now it's a world consciousness right out front. Everything is interconnected in the whole planet. So everything is amplified. Absolutely. There's an amplification. But you could, most of that would be the technology, the increase in abilities. The nature is the same. But because of that now, I'm talking these satellites and, all the infrastructures and the hacking, that these nations are involving themselves in, and everybody's doing all of it. When you're outside of it and you're watching it, I'm laughing because the Lord's given me a light space to view it from. But at the same time, yeah, it's ugly as hell. When you see what's really going on and what's going to come out of it, you get an inkling of a view of that. Yeah, there's not anything we can do about it. Honestly, in the world, No, it's going to play out. Has to. Because there has to be a total world consciousness change. And the only way that's going to happen is everybody confronted with the full effects of what they created and what was the reason for it. But as individuals that are moving in faith in our Father, yeah, we can conquer it from within. And that's the quest. I look at myself, and one of the most difficult things, when you're communicating with people, and especially people when you're close, like living in the same situation, living in the same house, same piece of property, is that to give up control and any form of domination, meaning controlling another person, that you turn it all over to the Father. You start dismantling within yourself the defense mechanisms that you have. And you have to recognize them, because all these things are justifiable because of the world we live in. And there's so much, you could call it offense. But see, all the offenses, all of them really, started out with a defense, meaning to protect self. I mean, why do people want to conquer all these places? See, what their defense is that started all that is they see that the bullies rule in the world. And so, in order not to be bullied, they become one. And they feel totally justified in it. Well, if you look at that, where it started was fear of someone else dominating you. And then you become what you're afraid of. Their fears will come upon them. Being in this world and being wise as a serpent. See, I like my truck. I do things because of the condition of the world. A woman not walking around provocative, and defending herself in that way. I would call it respecting the conditions of this world. It's the same thing with, locking places when you have to. I mean, a man of God does not like locking anything. He doesn't. He would really love to live in a totally open environment. And then relating with one another, same thing. When you're close to one another and you start realizing, well, if I say such and such, it's going to be war, even though it's the truth. That you start looking at ways not to enter into that if you can. So you're dealing with a world that's at war. So that's being wise. A war that is actually, a world that is actually controlled by an evil spirit. And so that's being wise. And then being harmless as a dove. Well, now that is minimalizing the self-protection, the defense. Now there's times I'm going to stand up and defend. I'm going to defend a brother or sister or, a whole realm if I see it under attack and being oppressed. Verbally or with my body according to the need. Yeah, there's all those kind of places that are righteous because of the condition of the world. But then to spend a lot of time thinking about that stuff and arming yourself in some way, no, that's where faith comes in. See, and that's what the world doesn't have. I mean, flat out. I mean, even people who enter into positions of, let's say, authority and power in the world, they cannot function in those positions in full faith. They can't. When I say they can't, they would not be put there. The people wouldn't put them there because the people are ruled by fear. The sons and daughters of God who are on this earth, who would be righteous examples for the people, they don't want them. Not in the fullness. No, increments, yeah, but not in the fullness, because fear rules. Fear rules because people are totally about their life in this world. They don't really believe in Jesus. They don't really believe in eternal life. And see, that changes everything. When you start, then you can start dropping the majority and not adding yourself too. But we're living in a world that's so far away from that. So the example is there. And where's it going? I mean, right now, how much energy do you think is in the world spent on protection, on defense? Wow. I believe it is the most amount of energy that everybody has in one form or another is being used for that. I mean, the military and everything around the military. I look at, of course, it's an interesting thing for me to watch. I look at, all the things that are involved right now in protecting a nation like the United States. Of course, there's a lot of nations that want to take it down. And some of that is because of, you could say, a come around. A lot of it. Even though the United States has done good, because everything is good and evil, and of course they've done good abroad, usually the good was to hide the evil. In other words, what they were going to get out of it. And then they have to defend themselves. And yeah, there's tremendous evil everywhere. I mean, that's out front. I mean, all these other nations, it's not like there's a good nation out there, really a good nation. I mean, under God, that's really of Him. No. There's ones that are less involved, less powerful, and in a way they're more peaceful because of that. But, yeah, as far as really a nation that is in the spirit of our Father, no, that's not happening on this earth. And, yeah, so I'm looking at that and then I take it inside. See, that's my inspiration. Because living with brothers and sisters and being in a prayer to be the answer to the evils of this world, the defense nature in us is the biggest break in communication and being able to understand one another, and easily turns into war. Because if you don't understand one another, then you start thinking that something is against you when it wasn't to begin with. But then it becomes that. Because once the war is started, oh my goodness, there's no end. There's no end except for an intervention. And the intervention could be one of the parties or both parties hitting their knees and calling on the power of our Father in the name of Christ. And really doing that. And that would be to lay down your armaments, your defense. In other words, turn everything over to the Father. Your druthers, what you would rather, what serves your little butt in comparison to the other person. Even domination in a conversation. How difficult that is when two egos are battling one another. That's hard. I'm talking from experience, knowing better. And that the answer would be for me to drop it all before it becomes a war. And I get signs all the time. The Father's always showing me because, altercations happen. They just do. In intimacy and in you're sharing spaces. When I say altercations, times where a little intensity comes up between people who love each other. But you're sharing in an intimate place. And the ability, well, first of all, you don't leave love. And if you start feeling that happening, you got to cut that off at the quick. Because if you can enter into a place where you stop loving one another and you're in an intimate place and you want to hurt the other person or you don't care how they feel at all, oh yeah, man. See, that's what's going on in this world. There's no connection. They lose the connection of recognizing that, we're inside of each other. You're part of me. If you get hurt, I get hurt. So yeah, it's a work. It's a real work. Because, of course, some people, you're going to be with some people, in any environment. Now, I'm living in a community and we get to work this stuff out. Believe me, it's not all smooth all the time. But it's a perfect witness of what's going on in the whole planet. And then you get down with yourself. Because even if the other person or persons that you react to are doing things provoking, there could be some pretty intensive provoking. And the person would not, see, when a person's in those spaces, they're already in a defense. That's what it's all about. They're defending something. And when they're defending something, they will become offensive. And they will provoke a response. They're not even intending to do that. They're taken over by a spirit. And then how to not react to that. How to cut that off at the quick. How to get yourself out of it before you're in it. Because once you're in it, then it needs an intervention. I've watched it many times. Once you're in it, you just have to wait for the Lord to get you out of there. And this is being aware. And then you got so many people out there who justify all this stuff. I mean, that's what they live in. And there's so many variables to the condition you're in. How much you're responsible for creating that kind of environment around yourself. And how much you're responsible for creating peace in those places. Of course, if you're a man or woman of God, your intention is always to create peace and to heal those places. But the only answer is to get down with our own sorry little butts. That's it. That is the only answer. You cannot expect the other side to fix themselves. See, because if I can find the place where I have power over, and there's no excuse, there is an understanding that this is a very high mountain. This is overcoming the world. I rap about this a lot because, in essence, that lack of ability to turn our lives back over to the Father is the seed problem in the whole world. And here's Jesus showing everybody the answer. The cross. Laying down your life. Giving it all. That's the answer. Amen.